All right, we are live. Great. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us on Inner Join. It's a show where we dive deeper into the world of data governance and data management. I'm your host, Shinji Kim, the founder of SelectStar. SelectStar is a data discovery platform providing an automated data catalog, lineage, and governance for your organization. So today, I'm very excited to have Dylan Anderson, head of data, incoming head of data strategy at Profusion. He has a lot of experience in data and also strategy management consulting. We're going to dive deeper into his experience of working with companies building data strategy and data ecosystem. So please comment on the chat if you have any questions for Dylan. And Dylan, welcome to Inner Join.
Thanks so much. No, really appreciate being here.
Awesome. So I always start with this question. Dylan, tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you get into data?
For sure. So my story getting into data is different. I mean, everyone is unique in how they get into data, but I started out in business school actually coding with R and doing some work with R. And so I learned how to code. I loved it. I loved the analytical side of it. I did some baseball analytics, which was really, really cool. And then I went into business consulting and strategy consulting. And that kind of R data world sat to the side. And I was doing 3.5 years of strategy consulting. I loved it, and I really enjoyed the strategy side to it. But eventually, I was like, the future of strategy really is and should be data driven. And what I did was I shifted into kind of data strategy and the data world. And that happened when I moved over to the UK. So I've been in London for about 5 years now. And I worked at Deloitte, where I was on a digital twins and simulation team, where we were building strategic scenarios of digital twins, virtual replicas of a physical system, and try to understand how to replicate in real life processes in Python, basically. And that kind of got me further and further into the world of like, okay, how do we build strategy in a more of a data driven way? And then I moved to another consultancy called Red Kite, where I was a lead consultant in data strategy, and that kind of was the birth of how I really evolved in data. And I think many of you have seen my LinkedIn and what I've done there and what I share about there. And really my passion now about data is just kind of understanding it all, because there's so much, it's so complex, and it's so interesting as it evolves so quickly. So and based on your introduction, as you know, I'm joining another small consultancy called Profusion in the UK in about a month as their head of data strategy. And other than data, other than strategy, I also enjoy biking, sports, all those fun things as well, and living in London too.
Good stuff. Thanks for sharing. It's very interesting how, well, first of all, like to me, I'm like, who uses R in business school? I've never heard of anybody using R in business school. Everybody uses Excel, but you use the R. uh, okay, that was a very different start. But like the main part of how you were using data for building business strategy, and now you're kind of doing the reverse. You're leveraging everything you learned from strategy consulting and try to map it to how to manage data or how to utilize data for businesses.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting space, because and I can tell you this as a fact, every project that I was on as a strategy consultant, one component of the business strategy had to do with their data analytics, of the company setting up a data analytics team, doing some sort of analytical modeling, building some dashboards, building machine learning algorithms, etc. But as a strategy consultant, you really only know that from a very high level. You are helping communicate, oh, yes, you need to do these things. This is how you do it. But I think at best, most strategy consultants can only get to like I'm being harsh here, but like that chat GPT level of knowledge of how you dig into these things. On the other side, and one reason why I want to go more the data strategy realm is because the role of data is growing so much in these companies, especially delivering on their strategic priorities. You kind of need to dig beneath the surface and really understand, what does it mean to actually build a data product or build a data dashboard? What data foundations do you need to have in place? What engineering strategy do you need to have to deliver that, or the governance strategy as well to manage the data across the organization. And I think that was what really kind of drew me into it. And I think the complexity of data today and data tomorrow is what makes it so interesting. And I mean, I think a lot of people in consulting, they drop out after 2 to 3 years because they're like, you know what, I've done strategy before. I'm going to get bored of this. I'm going to go work normal hours at a big firm or a big company. And but I think switching in from strategy to data has really kind of opened my eyes to how much more there is to learn and how much more there is to do in these realms.
For sure. So, can you define what is data strategy and why it's important for companies today?
For sure. So I think data strategy is really looking at how, as an organization, you can use available data and analytics to drive your business goals. And it really starts from the business strategy. And I think everybody hears that, of what you're doing as an organization, what you're moving forward to, and then mapping out that business strategy and that business model of where does data play a part, or where could it play a part. And that's really kind of that connection, the bridge of understanding where data fits into the strategy. Then within that, you have defined you define like the vision of data, what it should be in the near future. You define the use cases for data. So what do we want to build? What do we want to create? What do we want to invest in? So it's not always a use case is not always a dashboard or a machine learning model. It can be a data catalog strategy or defining the data governance roles and responsibilities. That is often foundational in a data strategy because you can't build the dashboard, you can't build the ML model until your data is actually of good quality, and those foundations create that. So that's kind of the second component. So is the use cases, and then a really good data strategy should have two other components that are often missed. One is an understanding of where the company is at within their data journey. So this can be either a maturity assessment of what they're doing, or kind of an understanding of like where the gaps are and the recommendations to fill those gaps. Or and then the second thing that they need that is often missed is an execution plan. The reason why so many data strategies don't get used is because they're like, here's what you should do, go and do it. But no one has time to actually execute against it. So a good data strategy needs to be a handheld, workshop-driven view of how do we operationalize these things and how do we make them work, and how do you, for example, get to that point that you want to get to in your vision. Because often people are like, oh, we want to do AI. And you're like, whoa. From an operational roadmap and executional roadmap, that will take you another 2 to 3 years because you have to do X, Y, and Z before you get to AI. And that's, I think, what makes up a good data strategy. And that's what we deliver and when I do projects with clients to build those.
Makes sense. The part you mentioned earlier about how you are mapping data to business strategy, business goals. This actually reminds me of the concept that Gartner is starting to push their clients around data governance. They have a term called adaptive data governance, which is all about mapping the business KPIs and what business is trying to achieve to the actual dimensions and things that are actually measured on the data side. And their recommendation is that's where you need to start governing and making sure the data quality and classification and everything is aligned for. That's kind of like what it reminds me of. But I think to go into the implementation side, it totally makes sense that you would want to have both the execution and that plan, the data ecosystem to be laid out.
Yeah, I actually like that you brought that out and you mentioned that. I've not actually heard that term, but I really like it because one of the biggest problems with data governance in a lot of these organizations is it's so essential to being successful, but it's so hard to do because companies just want to do data governance for everything. But what you were saying is like being adaptive and like, okay, what data takes priority? What processes are most important? What use cases are most important? that's a big part of the data strategy within it. And I know a lot of clients as well do data governance strategies for that reason, because you can't, especially with the data governance team, they are one of the most underfunded teams and underinvested teams in data organizations, and they need all the help they can get. So what is it that can really help them tackle the biggest problems to get the most value from it? So yeah, really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, exactly. The traditional data governance really pushes the data governance team to just classify all the data, inventorize all the data, put quality and processes for managing everything, which is boiling the ocean, and it just doesn't work. Like data governance implementation fails after 2-3 years after implement hiring and buying all the expensive tools. And this is like where also the reasons of why adaptive governance is needed is coming from. Yeah, I mean, we can go more into it. I'm wondering like uh, it feels like we under like maybe if you can summarize the importance of data strategy, companies with and without data strategy, when should companies should really think we need a new data strategy? Like when is that point of time, um, if they are considering whether they should come up with a new strategy versus keep going and working with what they have.
Yeah, no, I knew there was that second part of the question I missed on the first time, but the importance is, I think it's something that's not discussed enough. I think what I would say is what I've seen is 3, 4, 5 years ago, data strategy wasn't a huge thing unless it was a big organization. Everyone was jumping into data because they thought, oh, we need to get in. The FOMO was there. We need to start doing things and building things. And then I'd say about 2 to 3 years ago, a lot of companies were like, okay, we've just wasted a lot of money on this and we are not seeing the return. So let's maybe go through it a little bit more strategically. And so we've seen an uptick in data strategists, in data strategy consulting, in that whole realm in the past couple of years, because companies are realizing, well, if I'm paying an engineer a couple $100,000 a year to build some stuff, why don't I give them a clearer direction than just say go build stuff? And I think the importance of data strategy really comes in making sure that what you're investing in your data team is worthwhile and you're getting the value it actually you want and you are expecting. I think that's the other problem is people don't really understand what business value even means. And I think data strategy helps define that. It helps everybody realize what they are doing to get that business value, understand what the business needs to actually deliver on, and brings teams together as well. The biggest part about a data strategy and why it's so important in organizations is the change management. And that's where a lot of data teams fall apart. They're often a silo, they're doing their own thing, and they're not integrated with the rest of the organization. And a true data strategy brings people together. So it brings people from the data team with the business team, with the technology team, and make sure that everybody is on the same page about where we're going and why we're going in that direction. And so that's kind of the summary of why I think it's so important, because you're already investing potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in your data team. You might as well do it effectively and have a goal and a direction to head in towards to do that. And then your second question about what companies should do it and what companies shouldn't. I think a very immature company that's just getting started, startup, doesn't necessarily need it. Maybe they need some direction, but not necessarily a full-blown data strategy. Others with bigger teams probably do need some sort of direction, but it doesn't need to be a huge process. It could really be a month-long exercise with a consulting firm or one person going off and doing it for a while if they have the capabilities. I've also done data strategies for specific areas of the business. So not a strategy for the whole company, but one specific area that is of strategic importance for the organization, and figuring out how data can unlock that benefits within that area, and then therefore and then they can do a larger enterprise strategy on the back of that.
So one of the things that you just mentioned that really resonated with me is this uh, like kind of a ROI. Like, what's the value of having a data strategy? And now, after I have a data strategy and I've implemented it, I have a good, like, change management system and all that. Like, how would you is there a good heuristics that you always go to for measurement for businesses to recognize or to get, let's say, to secure budgets for implementing data strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think ROI for specifically a data strategy is really, really hard to prove out. I think within a data strategy, you can help prove out the ROI for other activities. And I think some measures of that and how we've done it, how I've done it in the past is kind of the value versus effort scale. With one client, for example, in the media space, we dove into kind of based on each use case, what additional benefits, what additional revenue, how many more streamers will you get, how much more ad revenue will you get because you have this knowledge, because you're able to do these things. And then we compared that against the effort. So like, how hard would this be to implement from a data perspective? Do you have the right data? Do you have the data engineering team to build those pipelines and the data science team to do that analysis, as well as the business side of like, okay, can you integrate this within the business? Will people use it? And we did that kind of analysis and determined, okay, these are the use cases that you should prioritize because they have the highest ROI, and when you can see this incremental value and benefit from it. And I think that's one way of determining that ROI is based off of kind of those KPIs that the business measures, and really kind of doing your best to work with stakeholders to understand what those are. And then there's another side to ROI, I think, which is more the back end stuff. And I think I just talked about this in an article in my newsletter this past week about data architecture. Mapping how data flows across the organization. I think we talked about earlier about catalogs and other elements of where that data sits, how often it's used. And having that view is also helpful to understand the ROI, being like, oh, this process that's making us a bunch of money, potentially, let's say, selling shirts, it is buoyed, and we've done a lot more with it because of this data analytics tool. And this is the data that feeds it, and this is the back end team that actually runs that. So we can attribute a lot of ROI to this team that's doing that. And I think helping do that, because in a fast paced data world, they don't do that enough reflection to really understand those things. But helping do that really helps unlock more investment and helps teams be like, okay, we need to spend more in this area rather than this area.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's very helpful. I feel like, but I think the part that I really like is how you can attribute it to like the business KPIs, but at the end of the day, that's kind of like a secondary, like a one level up. Usually, the work that you're doing in data is more fundamental and more horizontal, and that part kind of comes down to more of like how to do it, and that's also where data strategy comes in. Do we have our team or do we hire new people to build it, or use our time versus buying a tool versus things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and again, I think that's hard to quantify, which is one reason why it's often not invested in as much as it should be, and I think it's also one reason why it's also good to always get some level of external guidance on a data strategy, because an internal person can say, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, don't worry about that. We got it. But an external consultant like me, I would come with experience and say, look, I know you think you might got an engineering team, but you do need 2 or 3 data governance analysts to help you manage this and help you build it in this way. And I think that kind of, and I think you mentioned this before, and it's the title of my newsletter, but that ecosystem view, that holistic perspective of what little bits of the data ecosystem you need to help you get past the line and make things work is crucial to actually deriving value from your data efforts.
Yeah, for sure. We do have one question that came through. I'm gonna just push it up here. As a data strategy consultant, do you specialize in certain business domains, or do you focus on more horizontal data sides of things like governance, quality, catalog?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a lot of data strategy consultants, or a lot of strategy consultants, do have domain focus. A lot of data people also have domain focus because they tend to work with one or two clients. I've been lucky enough that in my strategy consulting days, I worked across dozens of industries. And now in the data strategy domains, most of my projects are 2 to 3 months, and I work across multiple projects, being the level of seniority I am. And so that gives me a lot of breadth across different industries and different business domains. So for me, is I actually kind of tend to try to play the holistic view. If you understand different areas of the data side of things, so quality, governance, catalog, engineering, it gives you a better understanding of how they mesh together and how they work together. That's hard, though. Let me tell you, it is hard and it's difficult because you're not trained to do these things. You're not doing it on a day-to-day basis. I am in some ways, and that's what gives me that kind of holistic perspective. And then the other thing on the industry side, everyone loves to go to a consultancy and be like, oh, you have a lot of industry expertise in retail, or logistics or something like that. And what I would say is what I found working across these industries is business models aren't that hard to figure out once you kind of understand two or three of them. That they're quite similar. It's usually selling something, finding customers, making money, and keeping your costs low. The use cases are also very similar as well. But so it's actually quite easy to translate some of what you do in data strategy across different industries. So my last three major clients were, one was media organization, one was a logistics organization that shipped pallets from place to place, and then another was an education company that they owned a bunch of private schools. Completely three different industries, but it took me a few days to kind of learn what that industry was about. And the thing also with data strategy is you constantly have to interview people in the organization, workshop with them, so you get to understand what they do and how they do it. And that's what makes what you deliver a lot more meaningful for them.
Yep, for sure. Thanks. So let's say I hired you, Dylan, for my company X, and I would like you to deliver a data strategy for me. At the end of our project, what does your data strategy actually look like? Is there a framework that you use? What are the main key components that you touch upon to deliver a holistic data strategy for me?
Sure. So I think I mentioned a few of them at the front. So one is a data vision. What are we really trying to do with data at a high level? But keep it also simplistic. You want a kind of a one sentence bit that might layer down into some strategic pillars. So usually I have three strategic pillars because us consultants love threes. But what is it that fits into that vision? Those strategic pillars then should layer into use cases. So I mentioned the use cases as well. What are those kind of 10 to 15 use cases that really will drive your data program and help achieve the vision? And that's working with stakeholders to really understand that. So you lay out kind of those use cases and what they look like. The other bit I mentioned was that kind of competency and maturity in this. Yeah.
Who are usually the stakeholders in this that you interview? That you actually, where do they come from? What level of organizations do they come from?
So they're usually quite senior, and they're usually across both the business teams and the data teams. You want to have an understanding of what the business users actually want to use for data. And this is where a lot of analysts and data scientists go wrong when they talk to stakeholders. They ask, what do you want to do with data? What we ask is, what do you want to do? What do you do on a daily basis? What do you want to achieve? And then it's our job to actually bridge that gap and be like, okay, so data could probably help you in this way. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. And then you work on it together. Business people aren't experts in data. They're like, oh, I'd love a chat GPT for my marketing domain that gives me everything I need. But like, is that realistic? No, it's not. So how do you kind of bridge that gap? So that's when you talk to business stakeholders. When you talk to the data stakeholders, you get an understanding of where the maturity's at, what the problems and pain points are, what we need to solve for first before going and building this chat GPT. And that gives you that contextual level, and that feeds into the third element that I was going to say that in that delivery is what's that competency assessment. So where are we at all these different places on the data domain map? For example, like how are we doing in governance? How are we doing in data engineering? How are we doing in master data management? And is that a priority for us to fix and do well in?
So you mentioned data governance, master data management. Like, how many of these components are there? Is it necessary to have all of them for organizations?
No. So it's not. I think I did a few articles. So one of my articles, I think it was my third one in my newsletter, so check it out. But I tried to map the entire data ecosystem. What was in everything. And when I say data ecosystem, most organizations talk about a technology ecosystem. So they're talking about all the tech in there. I'm like, no. That's not an ecosystem. That's a landscape. An ecosystem actually includes like the data strategy, the organizational structure, the operating model, and it includes detractors like change management and cost and new technology and stuff too. That's all within the relationships of everything. And so when you ask what's actually involved, there's a lot involved, but I think there are some key priority areas. So for example, you do need to have governance. You do need to have some sort of quality stuff. You do have data management. You do need engineering. You need analytics. Depending on your maturity, maybe you do data science and such. So there are kind of some of those key areas, but it really pulls back to and draws back to the first two things. So that vision and those use cases, what you want to do. That is what prioritizes what you're doing, where you need to have competency within kind of your data capabilities and your data domains.
Okay, makes sense. So after use cases, where do we go? Or is that what I get delivered as?
No, so yeah, you get so I've gone through the vision and strategic pillars. Mm-hmm. The data use cases, which can be both foundational or value add. So foundational would be governance and engineering. Value add would be dashboards, analytics, machine learning, AI. Then you've got the competency assessment, maturity assessment. What do we have on the table? Where are we at? What are the pain points and how are we able to deliver against these things? Those things all feed together and they kind of produce that operational roadmap, which I mentioned before, and how we're going to actually execute against this. I think the best thing for any organization doing a data strategy is to make sure you can actually action it, because otherwise it's a PowerPoint, it's a document that just gets dust and you never see again. So it's super important to make sure you have that kind of fourth bucket of action planning it, and then you can kind of go into change management and stuff like that. And I think the thing with data strategy is it can splinter off into different things. There is optionality for different scopes. So for example, I built operating models for organizations. I built org structures for new data teams that are being set up. I've done kind of data product delivery strategy, or I've even done a data engineering strategy. So there's different levels of data strategy where it can splinter, but those were the four main kind of key components of a true data strategy.
Makes sense. And that's really helpful, especially the fourth one. I think is really important. And my guess is that you'll be delivering it that is actually realistic for my situation and how much I can afford to make it happen. And yeah, I guess the fifth part of actually now, like what needs to happen, the change management, who needs to be involved, that is kind of like that implementation of the operation strategy that you lay out.
Exactly. There has to be some sort of action planning workshop and names attached to these things. Otherwise, it goes nowhere because everyone's so busy on a day-to-day basis anyway. So,
for sure. We do have another question about data strategy here from Richard Booth. What is the biggest misconception about data's role in strategy? And if you were to develop and activating a new strategy for organization, how would you use data to know whether the strategy was now well adopted slash mature?
Sure. I think in the first question, so what's the biggest misconception? I think is that you have to do data right away and that you have to just do analytics. I think organizations, especially executives, just jump straight to wanting to do analytics, wanting to do AI, and really jumping into like, okay, we need value right away and it needs to be instantaneous and we need insight, so we're going to hire data scientists and data analytics, and that's kind of wrong for many reasons. I think everybody knows you can't just jump to that, and I think it jumps over especially the data quality question, which I think is high and bright right now. Everyone's kind of thinking about data quality and what that means, from data observability to catalogs to lineage and stuff like that. Diving into the kind of the second question, so if you're developing and activating a new strategy for an organization, I think you need to do constant iterative, not maturity assessments, because maturity assessments are a lot of work, but iterative assessments of how we're doing in different areas of data and whether it's actually delivering value and understood well. And I think part of that is doing that initial baseline at the beginning of where we're at, and every kind of 3 to 6 months is really looking back on it and be like, okay, are we improving these different domains and competencies in our domain, in those domains, and are we starting to deliver against these use cases? And understanding whether we've delivered against these use cases will help really spell out whether we are using data properly and we're driving towards our vision. And I guess a big thing, if you're looking specifically at the business strategy, and I'm not sure if that's what you mean, Richard, but if you're looking specifically at the business strategy, having a KPI that delivers kind of executives those, having a dashboard that delivers those executives the KPIs they need to know and build that is probably one of the best use cases you can do, because often I see companies wasting so much time trying to do that, because every executive needs their KPIs to go to the shareholder meeting or sell new things, but a lot of them don't have access to clean data when doing that, and I think that's probably one of the best use cases for doing those types of things.
Yeah, makes sense. I think so I guess like a one follow-up question to this is, you talked about assessment. Maybe you need to do more continuous assessment. What is involved in the assessment? What does your assessment look like when you're initially doing the maturity assessment? And if you were to have your client to do the assessment, self-assessment on their own later, does it involve usually like surveys, or can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, a more in-depth one involves surveys, so you can do kind of a quick Google survey type thing or a Teams survey where you ask where we're at in certain areas and what they think they're doing, and a series of questions to kind of get that baseline, as well as interviews. I think interviews speak a lot, and after about 2 to 3 with people in the same domain, you start to hear the same thing, so it seems to be pretty well known. You present that back and you say, like, look, let's workshop it. Do we think we're here at a 2, or do you think we're here at a 4? And you can have definitions associated with each of those things too, and structure it in a way that's aligned with how your organization structures its data domains. And I've done this before, and it's really helpful, because every organization calls things differently, and so actually customizing it makes it a lot more relevant and bespoke, and you can customize it to the org structure and operating model as well. Then, to your point, you have some of the use cases against some of those areas. So data engineering needs to do X, Y, and Z, right? And 6 months later, you can either track it via interviews, you can track it via another survey, although it might be a bit more cumbersome, so you might do a very small survey, a 5-minute one. Or you can see how we're tracking against the different use cases, and talk to the project owners and project managers of those use cases to be like, okay, how are we doing? What do we need? And where do we reassess? And that's the difficult part about strategy. Is it's got to constantly be iterative and constantly evolve, because I mean the world doesn't stop, and as we know, people's strategy 2 years ago would definitely be out of date today, because it just doesn't. You can't keep up unless you're actually putting the work in. So I think that's kind of how you do it. But leadership needs to be bought in and ready to take an iterative process, rather than doing one thing 5 years and then waiting 5 years to do something else.
Yep, for sure. We have one more question about data strategy. How can we, as data strategists, you're a data strategist, I guess scientists too, how would we best explain how the effort is flexible due to changing business rule or KPI requirements, thinking about a highly volatile space like startups and nonprofits?
Sure. So I think, I hope I'm reading this question correctly. I think it's about having a bit of a baseline about how you actually measure effort. So how I think I explained it before with one of my clients, how we measured effort was from the business side, because I think that's where we're focusing in on, was we looked at the process, people, and technology view of what effort and how that would how that impact any use case that you were looking at. And I think the best way to do that is really understand what will go in to make this type of thing happen. And so if a business rule change or if a KPI requirement changes, you will know, okay, that will impact the process realm, and we need to kind of change and adapt for that. And I think process is one of the biggest ones. I mean, I talk about operating models all the time, and understanding how you be flexible within those situations is kind of crucial. And it really comes down to making sure that you have a well-defined use case, you have a well-defined strategy, you know where you're going, and that allows you to be a bit more flexible with how you kind of adapt to it. And I think I'm answering your question there, but again, it also, with like startups especially, it goes back to doing it iteratively and looking at these things iteratively and just changing and making sure everyone's on board for what's changed.
Makes sense. Thanks, Dylan. There were more like technical topics I wanted to dive into, but given the time and some of the questions we got, I might just like stay on track with data strategy. Actually, before that, I know that you wanted to, you had one topic about data ecosystem. Can you tell us what is data ecosystem? How is it different from data strategy? Shouldn't data strategy cover data ecosystem? I think that data ecosystem is also something that you've mentioned from your recent post. So.
Yeah, so this is something that came to my mind about a year and a half ago. And I noticed there's a kind of a gap in the data market. There's no one book that kind of explains what is data, because data has gotten so big that it's so hard to explain. If you look at all the O'Reilly books, for example, you got like Joe's book on data, the fundamentals of data engineering, or you've got a book on machine learning or data governance, right? And they're focused in that domain, and they're excellent material, but nothing actually brings it all together. How does it actually flow across one another? Where is that kind of if I'm an executive, I know nothing about data, how do I learn about what I need to know about on a quick basis? And so this is what I started talking about with the data ecosystem. And a lot of people think that's what data strategy is, but it's not. Data strategy is how you execute against your business strategy with data. And that is that's only a small portion of it. But with data strategy, you do start to look at all these different domains within the data ecosystem, all the different elements that are connected to it. And that's kind of where I started on this path of, okay, I need to better understand, for example, what's data architecture? How does that help data engineering? And how does, for example, data governance help data engineering maintain the quality of data as they build pipelines? All these things are connected, but you need to kind of understand how they are connected, and that's kind of what I'm describing as the data ecosystem. What other companies describe it as is how tools interact with each other. That's, again, a data landscape, because that's more of a set piece in time, whereas an ecosystem is about the relationships, about different points. And if you think about an ecosystem in the world, like a pond, for example, there's the weather, there's the birds, the trees, the plants, the germs, the bacteria, the viruses, that's all part of the ecosystem. And if we were talking about just the technology ecosystem, you'd just be talking about the plants or the animals in that ecosystem. In reality, it's everything. And the weather, for example, within the data world could be, oh, there's an economic crisis right now, and therefore data teams aren't getting the investment they need to invest in these things. That's something that someone has to think about, but it's never actually been brought in with all the other stuff together. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, the data ecosystem. To what you mentioned, I have a newsletter called The Data Ecosystem on Substack, and each week I'm kind of diving into a new topic. So last week was data engineering. This coming week is I'm actually defining what is a data product, and then I've actually got two more articles on data products as well, of what's the data product supply chain, and then how to operationalize and build data products, which I define as analytical solutions type things. So yeah, it's a lot, the data ecosystem, but I'm loving it because I'm learning a lot about different areas that I knew nothing about before.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you came up from that angle, because when you mentioned about data ecosystem, or even when you started with the question, what is data? It's like almost like asking a question like, what is software? What is the internet? Like, do you start from server, or are we talking about code? What language the code is written in, or like how the software works? It's like code gets compiled and mostly as a binary. Yeah, I mean, for data, it is applicable for so many different people in so many different levels, but it also does have so much complexity, like software, that we don't necessarily talk a lot about on that high levels. And I think that totally makes sense that there is a need to define those and also explain how each components work with each other. So that's very good to know. And so now, speaking of data ecosystem and now data strategy, you need to be aware of data ecosystem in order for you to put together a good data strategy. One more question that we got is if you have any recommendations for any books or courses to provide more guidance on developing and executing a successful data and AI and data strategy.
Cool. Yeah. So I haven't built a course yet, so that doesn't exist. No, I'm just kidding. I think there's a lot out there. I think my favorite writers on this is Simon Aspen Taylor wrote a book on data strategy, which I really enjoyed. I forget what it's called, but it's got data strategy in the title, so I'm sure you can find it. Jordan Morrow also wrote a book on data strategy and data literacy. I think he has 3 books on it, and I think they work really well together in defining that. And then I think from a course perspective, I really love Vin stuff on LinkedIn. Vin Vashishta, he has written a book, but he also does courses on AI and data strategy. He's been doing this for years, and I've heard really great things about his courses. Those are kind of 3 recommendations I would make. The other thing I would say is learn about business. Learn something about business acumen, what it means, especially if you're at a company and you're in a certain industry. Just try to pay attention to what other business stakeholders are doing, what they care about, what they know about. That really helps you develop an understanding of what matters and what doesn't matter. The biggest thing in data strategy is really explaining the so what. And consultants know this word and know this phrase, but if you were to present all this stuff in a client presentation or in a presentation to your CEO, and they were like, okay, so what? You have to be able to answer that. And what is the actual implication of this? What's the insight? What does it mean in 10 seconds or less? And driving that, I think, is the biggest thing you can get from a data strategy. And it all boils down to that because, as I just mentioned with the data ecosystem and what I mentioned before with data strategy, there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. But you have to be able to contextualize it in a way that's manageable and concise enough for people who don't have the time of day to really spend a ton of hours researching this. So that's another big element of learning these things is trying to understand the so what.
Yeah, I think that's Really important. I will follow up with you if you can share links to those books after the show. So
Yeah, for
you
sure.
can look it up and I can look that up too. But I think it's a really important point. Data strategy only really matters when it's aligned with the business strategy. So understanding the domain and the business behind is crucial to make it happen. Awesome. So with that, I would love to hear some examples, case studies that you refer to when data strategy really changed the business, how it came about, and the business outcomes, and the assessment that you went from before and after for some of your clients.
Yeah, sure. So I have two good examples. One is a media organization, and one is a logistics organization, which I think I mentioned before. The media organization, we went in, and I think we had originally did a kind of data architecture assessment. What is their tooling? How does it all fit together? And what we found, not surprisingly, was kind of a spaghetti map of how tools fit together, where it goes, and a lack of understanding about how data is
Sorry,
used.
just to step back, this media organization, about how big was this organization? How big was their data team? And like they initially, I guess, brought you guys in because they felt like, oh, somebody needs to take a look at our technical architecture on data and tell us whether we're on a good path or not. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So the organization, it's on the FTSE. I think it's on the FTSE 100. So it's a $1 billion organization, £1 billion organization.
Wow.
They had quite a big data team, and they were split into different divisions. So it did make it hard for that data team to make contributions across the organization because they were very kind of siloed divisions of the organization. And kind of what we found in that initial data architecture assessment, and this wasn't even data strategy yet, is that like they were just not getting the value that they want out of their data platform. They've invested probably like 15 or 50 million into it, and they just weren't getting the returns that they required. So the recommendation on the back of that was, okay, you should do a data strategy. And they were like, okay, we're investing a lot into the platform, we might as well do the data strategy. And within that kind of piece of work, we looked at, one, what do you want to accomplish from a vision and a use cases perspective? Two, what do you want to, how is your team structured? How should it be structured across the organization? Because they were a lot of data teams are just kind of put there. They're vertical, and they just keep getting added to without any thought of how or where people should sit. And so we did an assessment of like, okay, maybe you should have a CDO, or maybe this team should be better connected to the marketing team, and there should be some verticals, and business analysts should be aligned with the different business functions. So we did that kind of assessment to understand the operating model, and how the organization structure and the operating model of how they should work together. Another element of it was kind of the use cases, which I did mention before, but breaking it down and understanding, okay, what are the foundational use cases? So you haven't invested in governance. How do we invest in governance better? Or how do we invest in engineering? Where does that need to be? And what kind of use cases will do that? So on the back of actually, kind of jumping ahead of it, but on the back of that project, they end up doing a data governance strategy. They end up doing a data quality strategy as well, because they realized that data quality was so important for them. And because their data was worth so much, but they weren't actually treating it with the care that they needed to. And another component of the work was a technology assessment. So again, going back to the data architecture, understanding how the tech mapped together and how the data flowed and how it should flow in the future. What's that as is state and what's the to be state that you want to get to? And they found that really helpful because they're like, oh, wow, we can be a lot more efficient with how we do things because this connects to that instead of this connected to 3 different things. And those recommendations helped actually lead into a platform build and a platform design, where there's a consolidation of a lot of tools to make it more streamlined and a better overlay of what the architecture of the organization should be, especially given that there were multiple divisions in multiple parts of the organization. And then the kind of final component was that executional roadmap. How do we do this? How do we actually action this? And that did help from a let's actually go do it tomorrow perspective. And that got actually the buy-in and investment from the CEO of like, okay, we need to invest in this because everything that we did and we saw is that data is super important to our business. And actually, I missed one piece, and this was the foundational piece. This is the first piece, so I'm ashamed I missed it. Was an interview report, and basically, this is the foundation. This is what data means to your organization. This is what you're trying to achieve with your organization, and this is what everyone's saying about data and about how it can help revolutionize your company. And that was done through interviews, done through a survey, and then played back to those same people. So they were bought in, and they saw how everything was going to change and should change. And getting that buy-in was crucial to make sure it actually worked, rather than just like putting something in front of them 6 months later and saying this is the plan, and them not being bought in. So that's one really good example.
Anything that you can point out regarding the vision and the use case that was particularly like resonating with the board about how this company was trying to use data for?
I think the biggest thing was the business model. So they had a really complex business model where they had both, and I can't really get into it, but the detail. But basically, the business model was very hard to follow and hard to understand. Everyone within the company didn't even understand it. They understood their piece of it, right? So they were either, oh, we need to create great content, and we're a content creation company. Other people, the salespeople were like, no, we sell to clients. We help clients get the right audiences, and that's what we do. And then the people kind of above were saying like, oh no, we do all three of these things. And so what we did was we helped recreate, because I have that strategy consulting background, we helped recreate the business model in a more digestible way. And then we underpinned and said, okay, how does data help each of these elements to help solve the business model, or help solve your business questions, so to speak. And how do they relate to each other? Why do you need to create good content to help clients get the right audiences, for example? How do these things map together? And I think that was the really like, oh, wow, we need each other to survive. And we kind of knew that, but we didn't really get it until we saw it in this light. And then underlying factor that is, oh, we need data to do this better.
Makes sense. So where is that company now? Are they implementing the changes or?
They are, and they've kind of expanded it across the organization. So we were working within a small part of the organization, and now it's become kind of across the whole enterprise. And I think the realization that good data quality is essential for them to, one, capture the right audiences and the right clients, really has changed their perspective on why they're investing and what they're investing in. And I think before that project, they were just investing in data because they thought they should, but they weren't seeing the return. People called their data platform like a black box and such like that. And I think that's the kind of impact that a data strategy has. It reveals what's in the black box and how to structure it properly so that everyone's bought in, instead of just the data team thinking they're building great stuff that no one's using.
Mm-hmm. So then do you contribute the value of the strategy to be more like a visible, transparent communication with understanding of everyone that increases productivity? How do you position that? Or how would you explain that part?
I usually don't say, I mean, whenever I'm writing my resume, I guess I have to make up some stuff like that, right? But I think the value of a data strategy really comes from what you do after. And that's kind of where you really see it. And how I'd say it of that I know it delivers value is that pretty much every data strategy I've done has led to additional work for the consultancy I work at. And that means that they get it, they understand where they need to focus and invest in, and they need to do that tomorrow, and they know why they're doing it, right? And that kind of clarity is really, that's what pretty much every executive is looking for when it comes to data teams, because they're just lost when it's like, okay, we need to invest in this, but why am I investing it? Why am I forking over like $2 million for this new team? right? And I think
Yeah,
that clarity is enough for a lot of teams, especially given the amount people are investing in data, and especially given the low cost relatively of a data strategy.
for sure. Um, we only have 5 minutes left. Do you want to talk about the logistics company thing? If there was any like a particular difference from the media company example?
Yeah, sure. So I think the one thing I say about the logistics company is it's a lot more. It was a lot more data ecosystem vibe. So I think they needed a vision. They needed some use
Mm-hmm.
cases, all that kind of stuff. But they were already doing a lot. They were well on their way. They had great data teams doing awesome stuff, and I was really impressed. But the problem wasn't that they weren't doing good work and they didn't know what they were doing within their own domains. It's that they weren't doing it from a holistic perspective. They weren't talking to each other. They didn't really understand the dependencies between different organizations. For example, they were building an integration platform for all the disparate data sources coming into one. But there wasn't the data governance team wasn't necessarily involved as much as they should have been. Or even if the data governance team was involved, there was some key key initiatives and use cases that data governance and data quality team needed to do to make that integration platform better. Like set up the standardization before it gets integrated in this platform so that you don't run the risk of having poor quality data coming through the pipes. So it was actually it was working with the organization to understand what's happening across all the different data domains and bringing it together in a kind of cohesive way so that people were like, okay, I see why we need them and I see why we need to do that together. And so that's another. It was a great and really interesting project because it really kind of shone a light on even when data teams are operating at 95% and they're doing great things, they still might not be pointing in the exact right direction. They might be a couple degrees off going this way when they could be going this way a lot faster.
So your team has brought up the kind of cohesion and understanding across the organization
Yeah.
through your project. How do
Yeah.
they now continue to have that visibility and understanding cross organization today? Like, what do you institute in there? Is it a process, a tool, or like like a did you guys institute like a center of excellence group?
It's kind of a mix of all of them. So part of it was defining the right use cases that they need to focus on in the next fiscal year and getting buy-in and owners of those things. The other bit was laying down the documentation of like, this is where our data governance team is at, this is where we're aspiring to be, and this is how we'll get there. And doing that for each of the data domains and listing out the dependencies across the domains and the use cases that other teams are working on. So it was just like having the eye-opening documentation that, oh, this is what other teams are working on. Oh, this is where I need to be brought in, and making sure that everybody's on the same page about that because everyone was running at 125%, right? They're all doing their own thing. They're all really busy. But someone needs to sometimes be like, hey, these are the other things that will help you get there faster. Yeah.
And this is what's happening in this domain. So
Exactly. And luckily we had a sponsor within the organization who could help carry that along and help kind of wrangle that stuff moving forward. And I think that's really crucial because you need to, for me, I feel a lot better when I leave my work in someone's hands that they can help execute against if the company doesn't want us to help them execute.
yeah, for sure. Well, Dylan, thanks so much for your time today. This was a lot of fun, and I'm so glad to see a lot of interesting questions coming up from the show. So if you're interested in data strategy, follow Dylan. If you want to hear more cool, fun chats about data management and data governance, follow Select Stars page. I do host this show every other week. And Dylan, I will have to invite you back to the show because this was a lot of fun for me. So thanks so
No,
much. Have a great weekend.
yeah, this was great. Thanks so much, Shinji. It was really a lot of fun to talk about this stuff, and yeah, some great questions there. And next time we can dig into data governance and catalogs a lot more.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dylan.
Cheers. Thanks all.